Are you interested in having a conversation about how history is communicated to the public? If you are, and if you aren't already a public historian or a historical communicator, then this is the video for you. During this video, I'm going to be talking about two specific fields of history, public history and history communication, and how they differ, how they are similar, and also what sort of things you can expect from individuals who are one or the other and individuals who are both of these things. If that interests you, I hope that you'll stick with me, and I hope that at the end of this video you'll comment something new that you've learned over the course of watching it. Before diving into the main video, I wanted to take a brief moment to introduce myself. I am Luciano Gonzalez, and I am a trained historian. I recently graduated from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. My historical specialties are religious history and the history of Latin America, and I create videos every Wednesday. I'll be uploading a video talking about history. If that sort of thing interests you and you enjoyed the rest of this video, then I hope that you would consider subscribing to my channel, leaving a like, and sharing it with other individuals who are interested in history, history communication, and the history of Latin America, as well as religious history. I myself am a historical communicator, and I'm going to be talking about what this means over the course of the next few minutes. It is the lesser known of the two fields that I mentioned earlier in this episode between public history and history communication. It was founded in 2014 and 2015 by a historian named Jason Steinhauer. For history communicators, what we want to do is we not only want to increase the visibility of history in the public eye, but we also want to increase the public's perception of it, as well as their historical knowledge. We are advocates, educators, and trained individuals who specialize in communication, in mass media, and in making things not only more intelligible, but also more visible and more prioritized. What we want to do eventually is to push for the creation of a society that is more historically informed, that is more historically passionate, and that truly cares about having leadership, teachers, people in power who are historically literate, who are historically competent, and who are capable of communicating the significance of history not only to each other, but also to children, to future teachers, to future professors, to future historians. And as a history communicator myself, one of the things that I like to do is I like to talk about Latin American history, which is what I studied. It's my personal and professional specialty, as well as religious history, since I am an atheist who's very interested in the history of religion, in the history of theism, in the history of belief, and these are topics that I find super interesting and that I talk about a whole lot. I am working on creating a brand using history and religion that focuses on educating people and leaving them at least one new piece of information smarter in terms of their overall knowledge than they were before they started viewing my content, before they started reading my articles, and it's something that I take very seriously. The next field of history that I'm going to be talking about is public history, which is history out in the real world, and it's for individuals who are interested in making history more visible, as well as quite possibly more understood, but also more plainly seen throughout society. The National Council on Public History has a very interesting moment in one of their blog posts where they're talking about public history, where they define it as, I know it when I see it. And they say that for veterans and for new professionals in the field, that's probably a good enough description. I agree. If you see history and you know that it's history, you are almost certainly seeing the work of a public historian. But of course, you don't always have to know that it's being worked on by a public historian to see public history in action. If you go to a museum, if you see an exhibit created by someone that's outside of a classroom that talks about history, if you go to a panel organized by a local nonprofit that aims to educate people about the history of a specific community, the history of a specific celebration, or anything like that, you are seeing the work of a public historian, and that matters a lot. Public historians are fantastic individuals whose work shapes how communities see history in the real world. And that's one of the most important applications of history, aside from merely creating and correcting people's understandings of historical events. And public historians are magnificent individuals whose work is largely underserved, largely under-sponsored, and largely done by people who don't always have all the resources that they need. That's one of the reasons why historical communicators who advocate for increased resources for the field of history, for increased attention to be paid to the field of history, matter quite so much. There is an overlap between history communicators and public historians. Many people are both, even without realizing it. Many historians who studied history but then never went any farther, they never specialized in anything, they never went to graduate school, they work in ways that make them both public historians and historical communicators. And that overlap and some of the reasons why it matters is one of the things I'm going to be talking about next. The overlap between public history and historical communicators matters a lot. It's a significant overlap that talks about the fact that these are two specialized professions, two specialized career paths that affect how the public, how people who aren't historians perceive history, perceive historians, and perceive the field of history in general. This overlap is significant. But one of the biggest differences between the two is often that public historians oftentimes narrow themselves down by working with communities, nonprofits, and museums that specialize in one thing and focus exclusively or semi-exclusively on that. That's a good thing. It's important that people have these specialties. It's important that people devote time and energy to these specific things as opposed to doing everything all at once. But historical communicators, on the other hand, have a passion for advocating for the field of history as a whole. We have a passion for advocating that other historians be granted increased resources, that we create events and that we create hype for history in the public eye, as well as making history in the public eye not only more visible, but also more intelligible. We are individuals who specialize not only in creating hype for things like specific historical resources, specific historical events, and specific historians, but also we want to make people excited to learn about history itself. And in creating that excitement, what we want to do is we also want to enable people to vote for more historical resources. We want to work with policymakers to make sure that they are historically informed and that their policies have a base that is not just scientifically literate like science communicators do, but also that it's historically literate and that it's well aware of itself and understands the correct historical context that it's taking place in. History communicators and public historians have lots of things in common, but we also have lots of things that are different. Our specialties are different. Many historical communicators that I know of work exclusively online. We are individuals who are working to create blog posts. We create historical communities that are entirely digital in nature and that specialize around specific topics. And these things are all awesome, because these are things that public historians often don't have time to do, even if they want to do. And it's great that someone is creating and advocating for a community that is not only historically literate, but is also technologically savvy and is able to do and create all sorts of digital communities. Take, for instance, the HistCom subreddit that I created earlier today. This is the first time that history communication has ever appeared in a concentrated form on Reddit, and that's something that I'm proud of. That's one of my contributions to history communication, and I will be linking that down below as well. I have a mission statement that I made to myself, and it's when I create videos, I am going to do my best to leave people with more information than they came in with. I am hoping that by creating this video, you have learned lots of really interesting new things, and that you've also gained an awareness of the work of historians that you didn't have before. Because it's easy to think of historians as people who are stuck in academia, and lots of historians ourselves have talked about this, and we're feeling very frustrated by it. So that's why we talk about and we advance fields like history communication and fields like public history. We want to work hard to combat these stereotypes, not only for the sake of combating them, but also so that people can understand that we aren't stuck in academic places by ourselves, that we aren't just in universities, that we aren't just in classrooms. Historians are all over in lots of different places, and if you learn something new today, I hope that you'll share what was the new thing that you learned with me. If you enjoy this sort of content, I would absolutely love for you to leave a like. I would love to read and respond to any comments or questions that you might have, and I would be thrilled if you would consider subscribing to my channel. Every Wednesday, I'm going to be creating videos centered around history. I am also going to be talking about specific fields within history itself and various career paths for historians, as someone who studied history and wants to make history more accessible to people who are not only non-historians, but also to aspiring historians who are younger than I am, or who started studying history later than I did in their lives. If you enjoyed this, be sure to let me know, and have a wonderful day.